affairs relating to the crisis in and around Ukraine, including in the context of those matters that are on the agenda of BRICS. I mean the reform of the global governance system. For example, if we speak about the Bretton Woods institutions over the last 3 or 4 years, just look at the data. I don't remember it from the top of my head, so I cannot cite exact figures, but please look at what countries have received loans and how do they correlate between each other. So, for example, Ukraine in the last 3 or 4 years received some 600% of their quota in loans. So this amount of loans is several times higher than the loans were received by all the African countries over the same period of time. This is a great example of how the Bretton Woods institutions are being administered and whose interests they are promoting, not the interests of the global governance system. As for the Ukrainian crisis, no one among my counterparts spoke about it today or yesterday, but I can say it once again that we shared our estimates of what's happening, and considering that the agenda of our assembly in New Delhi, among other things, there was reforms at the UN. We urged everyone on following all the UN Charter principles, not selectively, but in its entirety, in interconnectedness, and we focused paid special attention on the part that our Western colleagues do not mention anymore, do not cite anymore. I mean, the very first chapter of the UN Charter, the need to ensure human rights, regardless of the gender, race, language, and religion. And we try to draw attention of our colleagues to this chapter because in terms of religion and in terms of language, these rights are being violated by the Nazi regime that was put to power by the Western countries during coup d'etat in 2013. And I mentioned it some time ago, talking to journalists. Ukraine is the only country that banned language in all spheres of life. And this language is an official language of the UN, and the Western and other representatives and officials who deem it possible to talk to the Kiev regime, they do not even mention, from what we hear, from what we know about their conversations, they never mention this need to go back to the need to ensure human rights in terms of religion and language. There is no problem with Hebrew at the Arab states in Israel. There is no problem neither with Arabic nor with Farsi. Nowhere in the world there is such a situation. Civilizations and cultures coexist peacefully, but such a thing is possible in Ukraine. And sometimes when we speak to our Western counterparts and American counterparts, they say, well, when we resolve this issue, we will incorporate this item about going back to ensuring human rights in the field of language and religion. But this cannot be one of the conditions. This should be done, this must be done without any other conditions, because it's a responsibility of Ukraine, not only under the UN Charter, but under their own constitution that no one put to hold. And under these constitutions, the rights of any ethnic minorities must be guaranteed by the state. So they adopted a lot of laws that violate the constitution, and they are trying to put all of these laws, all of these decrees into practice in violation of their constitution. And but we did not hear any comments on this from my counterparts.
Can you speak on the mic? Mic is not on.
Микрофон идет в камеры, поэтому колонок нет. Just louder, a little bit louder.
Energy cooperation between India and Russia has grown significantly. Are there discussions underway for long-term oil, LNG, or nuclear energy agreements in local currencies?
Да, все это обсуждается, и
Yes, all of this is being discussed, and
переходит
our
от
settlements with India were going away from dollar to using national currencies and the currencies of other countries that do not abuse their position in the global financial institutions.
ограничений
There are no restrictions that you've mentioned in any area for us. We are open for everything that our Indian partners are interested in,
сбоев, никаких отказов.
and we have not dealt with any problems in this regard, and I don't think that we will have any issues in this regard. Minister Lavrov is visiting media center Donald Trump before traveling to China. He was responding to journalist questions, and he said no when asked whether there was an understanding between him and Vladimir Putin regarding Donbass. What does this mean, given that it had previously been claimed that such an understanding exists?
Мы всегда
We always said that we have a clear understanding
по итогам
after the talks that took place in Anchorage, Alaska, on August 15th of the last year. And I can remind you, and President Putin mentioned this on several occasions. Before that summit, Stephen Witkoff traveled to Moscow, special envoy of President Trump's, and he
как обеспечить
conveyed the American understanding of how a long-term settlement of the conflict in Ukraine can be ensured. And these ideas were based on the understanding, U.S. understanding of the root causes of this crisis, including, as it's been mentioned by on a number of occasions by President Trump, Ukraine cannot become a part of NATO, and the realities on the ground must be recognized. The realities on the ground after the referendum that took place in this territory. So based on this understanding, Mr. Witkoff
привез соответственно.
brought their suggestions to Moscow, so we started working on them, and a week later, during the summit in Anchorage,
Президент Путин
President Putin said that he can support the American initiative, all the offers, all the proposals by the American side.
упомянул,
I don't think that I'm revealing a big secret when I'm saying that, well, President Putin listed all the components of the American proposal, one after another, item by item, and after every item that he mentioned, he asked Mr. Witkoff, who was attending the talks, am I saying that right? Am I explaining it right? And Mr. Witkoff said that yes, it was the right understanding of every item. So I don't want to call it a spirit of Anchorage, spirit of Alaska. It's a different thing because the spirit is always friendly and mutually respectful. That's the spirit between our countries. But in Anchorage, apart from this spirit, there was an understanding of the basic principles of the settlement that were suggested, that were proposed by the United States and were supported by the Russian Federation. And after that, the Europeans and Zelensky, of course, and especially London, all of them are doing everything to stop the United States from adhering to their own initiatives. And I would like to make a following comment. It does not mean that after we publish the Anchorage decisions and everything will be settled. We agreed on the basic principles there. And there are a lot of issues, there are a lot of matters that require more detailed approach, more detailed consideration. And such a consideration is possible after we have a final agreement on the Alaska Accords. I hope that it will happen, well, matter sooner than later. But as President Putin said, under all circumstances, we will ensure that every goal of the special military operation is accomplished, preferably via the diplomatic means. If not, we will continue to accomplish them during the special military operation.
Sir, can you give us the status of oil supplies to India? Is Russia supplying more oil amid disruptions to the supply chain?
I believe it's not a secret data, not a secret statistics. We publish this data both here and in the neighboring countries and in the global media. We publish it, and this information shows that oil supplies to India increased, and it does not depend on us. It depends on our Indian counterparts that always received a positive answer towards their requests of supplying more energy, and this is how we continue moving, to continue acting.
The mic, please.
Good afternoon, Minister Lavrov. Do you think there is a possibility of concluding this meeting with a joint statement?
I've already said that the statement by the Indian presidency will be released during the day, as we were told by the Foreign Minister of India.
Economic Times. Please, Economic Times.
They're gone.
Beyond.
Hi, Your Excellency. I'm Siddhant from Beyond. Sir, how do you see India-Russia relationship in next few months? India is going to host the BRICS summit, and of course, the India-Russia annual summit is also going to take place. In that context, if you can perhaps talk about how do you foresee the India-Russia relationship?
Well, I've described it in detail. I've spoken about this during my introductory remark. We are preparing for the BRICS summit. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, yesterday, he reaffirmed that this year it's his turn to make a visit to the Russian Federation. We will be preparing for this top-level summit. If we list all the areas where we cooperate, well, it will take all of this day and probably more. Briefly, I mentioned this during my introductory remarks. We are interested in making sure that our privileged strategic partnership continue to develop in all the fields, in all the areas. During the talks, during this visit, we felt that there is the mutual approach from the Indian side as well. Good afternoon, Minister Lavrov. Europeans are now speaking of a growing desire to resume dialogue with Moscow, and they are planning to appoint a representative. How do you assess this stance on the part of Europe? And do you believe that they are truly serious and sincere in their intentions? As for the European sincerity, I would not even cite you the examples that were mentioned by the President of the Russian Federation and in my previous speeches. So examples of hypocrisy, of blatant lies. For example, Merkel and Hollande, they admitted as much in February 2015. They signed the Minsk Accords along with President Putin and then the then leader of Ukraine, Poroshenko. They were agreed, they were endorsed at the UN Security Council, and then a few years later they said we were not going to implement these Minsk Accords. We needed to gain time to pump more weapons into Ukraine. And now they're not even trying to hide behind any masks. Germany is again leading this movement to support Nazism in Europe. And President Zelensky has now been appointed as a new Führer, a new leader of this Nazi movement. And Germany is playing a leading role in this effort. It's a very concerning fact. But we know how it ended from history in the past, and there can be no other conclusion to such a movement. And now we can see that Europeans, all of a sudden, they woke up, and they don't say anymore about dealing a strategic defeat, inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia on the battlefield, and all of a sudden they start saying that, yes, we need to talk to Russia, but at the same time they make a comment, they say, yes, we need to talk to Russia, but we Europeans will decide the topics and when and about what we are going to speak. I cannot take this statement seriously. President Putin
европейцев на их
gave a test to the Europeans to test their political maturity when, on May 9th,
9 мая
answering a question during a press conference, he said that the former Chancellor of Germany, Schröder, could be a representative of Europeans during the talks with Russia. Now, look at what it stirred in Europe, and some are saying that it is unacceptable. Kai Kallas is saying that I should be the one to represent Europe. And some people in Germany, they started thinking about this possibility. So it was an interesting discussion after this statement by our president. Some people even mentioned, well, yes, Schröder, he is on the side of Moscow, seemingly, but we need someone to look after him. And now they mentioned the former president of Germany, Steinmeier. And as for the trust for the West, I would like to remind you about another event that took place 1 year before the Minsk Accord talks. And in February 2013, President Yanukovych, then President Yanukovych, and the Ukrainian opposition signed a peace agreement to hold elections and to settle all the aspects of the so-called Maidan crisis. And this agreement was guaranteed by France, Poland, and Germany. And it was signed by the very same Frank Steinmeier on behalf of Germany. And the next morning, after Steinmeier signed this agreement, the opposition violated this agreement, and they did not care about Germany or France or Poland and their guarantees. They seized the governmental building, and they started hunting down President Yanukovych to eliminate him, to kill him. And we asked Berlin and Paris and Warsaw and asked them, well, you guaranteed these agreements. Please bring the opposition back to their senses. And they were all saying humbly, well, we don't know if it's a coup d'etat or not coup d'etat. Sometimes democracy looks like this. So this is answering the question to the extent we can trust former President Steinmeier. So we are not imposing ourselves on the Europeans, and answer by President Putin must be considered in this regard. We are open for negotiations, but we are not going to run after them, to beg them for these talks, especially since their background is negative, their ability to negotiate, to come to any agreements is negative. They had a chance, both in February 2014, they had a chance to resolve this crisis, and in February 2014, the agreement was violated and a coup d'etat took place, and then in February 2015, the Minsk Accords were signed, and in both cases, Europeans were guarantors of these agreements, and they failed as guarantors and as good faith mediators. Yesterday, the White House stated that Chinese President Xi Jinping, during a meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump, expressed an interest in increasing oil purchases from the U.S. to reduce China's dependence on the situation in the Strait of Hormuz. Do you see this as a risk that it could lead to a reduction in China's purchases of Russian energy resources? And in your views, the cooperation with China on a wide range of issues announced by the U.S. an attempt to drive a wedge between Moscow and Beijing? And how do you assess the likelihood of success for such actions by Washington? Well, so many thoughts you put into your question. We do not interfere with trade relations between the third countries. We have an agreement, multi-layered agreement between ourselves and the People's Republic of China, and it was endorsed by the government and by the parliament, and in all the areas of interstate relations, including we have other things. We have cooperation and trade and the economy, and part of this agreement is energy supplies. And based on these agreements, we carry out all our obligations, and China carries out its obligations. And we do not ask the Chinese to discuss their plans of relations with the other countries without us, and China does not approach us with similar requests.
Если договоренности, которые
If there are any agreements or they will reach agreement, Beijing and Washington, if it's in the interest of our Chinese friends, we will be happy for them, but we will never be a part of
участвовать
any games.
очередных играх по реализации
I think it was Henry Kissinger who said it first, that relations between Washington and Moscow and Beijing, these relations must be better than relations between Moscow and Beijing. Well, that's the game that Americans and other colonialists have been playing for years, divide and conquer.
Нам она знакома.
It is quite popular in the Western politics, but this is not our method. This is not the method that is pursued by the People's Republic of China. We have relations with China, and a number of occasions, President Putin and President Xi Jinping said this, and also during their summits, they said this. These relations are much deeper, much stronger than traditional military political alliances. These are relations of a new type, and these relations stabilize global politics, global economy, more than anything else, more than any other factor. RBC, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated that the U.S. plans to China to exert pressure on Iran with the aim of resolving the conflict, including the issue of unblocking the Strait of Hormuz. How do you view this approach? Have you discussed this with your colleagues within the BRICS framework? Now, are there any plans to engage with the Chinese side to discuss the outcome of Donald Trump's visit to Beijing and the agreements reached there? We are not aware of any attempts by the United States
Китайской Народной Республики.
to get China to do something like that. If we speak about the gist of what you described,
Китай помог Америке.
to have China help the Americans to deblock the Strait of Hormuz, I would like to say once again, the Strait of Hormuz was not blocked. It was open for safe navigation until February 28th, when for the second time in 6 months, the U.S. and Israel
Агрессию
launched aggression against the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Народной Республики. И что Китай
And
что от Китая
what would Americans want from China in this situation? It is difficult for me to understand. So we started something. We are at the dead end now. Now we need to deblock energy supplies, fertilizer supplies, food supplies via the Strait of Hormuz, but we cannot really do that. We cannot really succeed. Iran refuses. Please exert pressure on Iran. Well, it looks quite simplistic. I don't think that
тот пример,
this is how international diplomacy should look like.
равняться.
The main thing is to eliminate the root cause. The root cause is clear to everyone. You can read it from the articles or even in the cartoons that the Western newspapers are publishing now. You can learn it from there. Minister Lavrov, how are relations with Armenia being managed at ministerial level today, given the latest events and statements by Nikol Pashinyan?
У нас отношения
Well, we have existing relations with Armenia, and these relations are close. These are allied relations, but they're also difficult at the same time, considering how the West is trying to pull Armenia,
вслед за некоторыми другими
as well as some other CIS members. They are trying to pull it into their sphere of influence to make it break the beneficial trade, investment, and economic ties with their CIS partners or Eurasian Economic Union partners. On April 1st, when President Putin received Prime Minister Pashinyan at the Kremlin, he said it bluntly: we will respect any choice that our Armenian friends would make, but at the same time, we need to understand that within the Eurasian Economic Union, we cannot continue cooperating if Armenia, as they declare at the top level, if Armenia
встанет
will be put on the path of joining the European Union, because
торговые режимы
the trade regimes and many other things, they exclude each other. You cannot be a part of both organizations. And Alexei Overchuk, Deputy Prime Minister of Russia, said as much during his statements, and we are saying this openly to our Armenian friends. This is our duty as allies to explain how economic integration processes are working in the modern world, and what's the difference between Eurasian Economic Union and the European Union, and judging by how the negotiations on acceding to the European Union between Brussels and our Serbian friends are unfolding. Currently, one of the conditions that is given to any country that wants to become closer to the European Union or to join the European Union, one of the conditions is to join the foreign policy decisions made by the EU. And at the current stage, the EU's foreign policy is blatant Russophobia. And I believe that our Armenian counterpart also know this, and they will take this into consideration. And I have good personal relations, good contacts with my Armenian counterpart, Minister Mirzoyan. We maintain contact mostly by phone, and we had a CIS ministerial meeting, and Armenia was represented by the deputy minister, but we also know him well, and he was an active part of the discussion to prepare the final documents of that summit. So I think we will have a good chance to discuss the issues we are facing because of the European Union insisting on pulling Armenia into its orbit of influence, and it's happening at the risk of those benefits that Armenia enjoys being part of the Eurasian Economic Union. We will have a chance to discuss all these matters, all these issues later in May, during the last week of May, when the Supreme Eurasian Economic Union Council will hold its summit in Kazakhstan. But from what I heard, Prime Minister Pashinyan mentioned that he is too busy with his election campaign and he will not be able to attend this summit of the Eurasian Economic Union. Well, that would be really sad, because that would be a good opportunity to discuss all the things, all the matters that are being floated currently. Good afternoon, Minister Lavrov, RT friends. Recently, Emmanuel Macron has stated that Russia are a true colonizer in Africa. How would you comment on such assessments by the French leadership? Well, the French should know how real colonialism look like and how real colonizers look like. I believe some 5 years ago, when changes took place in the Sahel countries, in Mali in particular, I was at the UN General Assembly, and on the sidelines of UN General Assembly, there are always a lot of bilateral meetings, and I had a meeting with Josep Borrell. At the time, he was what Kai Kallas is now. And during that meeting, Foreign Minister of France was also present. Le Drian, I believe his name is, and since Mali was, well, a hot topic of the international agenda, they started saying, well, how is it possible that you supported this change of government and so on and so forth, and among other arguments, because I was saying, well, okay, the new government approached us with the request to help to ensure with the reforms to strengthen security. We just respond to their request. And during the General Assembly plenary session, I repeated the same thing, and then my counterparts, the Foreign Minister of France and Josep Borrell, they said, well, you know that Sahel and Africa, this is our territory, the European Union's territory. I said, no, I don't know this. I know that you had colonies in there, but then the independence was declared, you ceased the colonization, there is a resolution by the United Nations, and I don't believe that former colonies are yours forever, where other countries have no right to enter, to be there. But that's the philosophy they had. I believe it's in their DNA, in the DNA of our French counterparts, and this is how they measure everyone else, and we have a different system of measurement. Thank you.
Спасибо большое. Завершили трехдневное пребывание в Нью-Дели. Главная тема визита – это участие в министерской встрече. Внешнеполитические ведомства проводили очередное свое заседание в рамках БРИКС. Перед этим у нас состоялась двусторонняя программа с нашими индийскими коллегами. Были подробные переговоры с министром иностранных дел Субраманиамом Джайшанкаром. И состоялась также беседа, когда мы были приняты премьер-министром Индии Нарендрой Моди. Мы подтвердили в ходе встречи у главы правительства и на переговорах с министром иностранных дел все те договоренности, которые были достигнуты. Can you just leave? Мы завершили трехдневное пребывание в Нью-Дели. Главная тема визита – это участие в министерской встрече. Внешнеполитические ведомства проводили очередное свое заседание в рамках БРИКС. Перед этим у нас состоялась двусторонняя программа с нашими индийскими коллегами. Были подробные переговоры с министром иностранных дел Субраманиамом Джайшанкаром. И состоялась также беседа.
Dear colleagues, we start the conference, please. Be quiet. The questions will fall.
Добрый день. Мы завершили трехдневное пребывание в Нью-Дели. Главная тема визита – это участие в министерской встрече. Внешнеполитические ведомства проводили очередное свое заседание в рамках БРИКС. Перед этим у нас состоялась двусторонняя программа с нашими индийскими коллегами. Были подробные переговоры с министром иностранных дел Субраманиамом Джайшанкаром. И состоялась также беседа, когда мы были приняты премьер-министром Индии Нарендрой Моди. Мы подтвердили в ходе встречи у главы правительства и на переговорах с министром иностранных дел все те договоренности, которые были достигнуты. Can you just leave us, huh? It's either you yourself or your phone who always speak. На встрече у премьер-министра и на переговорах с министром иностранных дел подтвердили. Look, can you leave us? I am not joking. Can you leave us, please? Ребят, выведите его отсюда. Sir, excuse me.
Give me a phone, quick. Give the phone, please. Give the phone to Peter, quick.
If you don't surrender your phone, they will take out a gun, you know. Еще раз попробуем. В ходе переговоров с министром иностранных дел Индии, с Субраманиевым Джайшанкаром и в ходе продолжительного приема для беседы у премьер-министра Индии Нарендры Моди мы обсудили ключевые направления нашего особо привилегированного стратегического партнерства, которые были определены в ходе саммитов президента Путина и премьер-министра Моди, включая последнее такое мероприятие, которое проходило здесь, в Нью-Дели, в декабре прошлого года. По итогам той встречи в Верхах в декабре 2025 была подписана очень важная программа развития стратегических направлений экономического сотрудничества между нашими странами до 2030 года. Она содержит все необходимые шаги, которые будут предприняты для того, чтобы достичь к 2030 году цели в $100 миллиардов в рамках нашего двустороннего товарооборота. Рассмотрели мы пути совершенствования механизмов, которые у нас существуют, и дальнейшего развития, укрепления этих механизмов, практического торгово-экономического, инвестиционного сотрудничества, таким образом, чтобы не зависеть от негативного, недружественного воздействия третьих стран. Условились укреплять транспортную, технологическую, инвестиционную кооперацию, включая совместное развитие международного транспортного коридора Север-Юг и Северного морского пути. Уделили внимание и шагам, которые предпринимаются для оптимизации системы прямых взаиморасчетов. У нас общий настрой на увеличение поставок российских углеводородов, удобрений, сотрудничество в сфере мирного атома весьма успешно развивается, равно как и в сфере мирного освоения космического пространства. По мирному атому обсуждали возможности предоставления нам новой площадки для строительства еще нескольких блоков атомных электростанций, что позволит значительно укрепить энергетическую безопасность Индии. У нас на хорошем уровне по традиции военно-техническое сотрудничество, включая совместный выпуск современных образцов вооружений на основе передовых оборонных технологий, ну и хорошие планы в сфере освоения космоса. Это и спутниковая навигация, и пилотируемые программы, и совместные научные исследования. С совпадающих позиций мы рассмотрели международную повестку дня, как в ходе двусторонних переговоров с индийскими друзьями, так и на министерском заседании БРИКС. Основное внимание уделили подготовке к 18-му саммиту БРИКС, который состоится здесь, в Нью-Дели, в сентябре нынешнего года. У нас на уровне министров было общее мнение о том, что за 20 лет своего существования БРИКС прошел серьезный путь, оформился в самоценное, такое многогранное, я бы сказал, партнерство, которое охватывает практически все сферы межгосударственного взаимодействия. И объединение реально рассматривается в качестве главного лидирующего элемента в процессе формирования полицентричного миропорядка и продвижения интересов государств мирового большинства. Сформировалась очень надежная, прочная, я бы сказал, культура общения, которая коренится во взаимном уважении, суверенном равенстве, настроена на учете мнений всех, на формирование честного баланса интересов в качестве залога выполнимости и реализуемости всех достигаемых договоренностей. Именно такой подход обеспечивает, как мы убеждены, устойчивость и авторитет БРИКС среди государств мирового большинства, сохраняет притягательность для все большего и большего числа стран. И особое внимание мы уделили кризисным ситуациям в различных регионах мира, включая Ближний Восток, имея в виду и кризис вокруг Ормузского пролива, вокруг Ирана, ситуацию в Ливане, на палестинских территориях, где осуществляется процесс ликвидации даже любых намеков на создание палестинского государства в нарушение решения Организации Объединенных Наций, Ливия, Йемен, все это сплетает, Сирия, все это сплетается в клубок противоречий, которые делают положение на Ближнем Востоке, на севере Африки все более и более сложным, и практически каждая из упомянутых мной горячих точек является результатом грубого вмешательства западных стран в дела той или иной страны, включая вооруженные вторжения, свержение режимов, которые мы наблюдаем за последние, наверное, 15 лет, начиная с так называемой арабской весны. Говорили мы и о недопустимости практики, которые, к сожалению, продолжаются, односторонних принудительных мер с целью наказывать суверенные правительства, вмешиваться в их внутренние дела. В этой связи была подтверждена солидарность с нашими кубинскими друзьями. А Куба, как вы знаете, является одной из стран-партнеров объединения БРИКС. Эта категория стран-партнеров была учреждена в 2024 году, в октябре, на саммите БРИКС в Казани. И она сейчас вот была представлена более чем дюжиной стран, которые уже обладают таким статусом. Мы четко высказались в пользу продолжения реформы системы глобального управления. По сути дела, Запад, который пестовал модель глобализации, предложенную в свое время Соединенными Штатами, и долгие десятилетия продвигал эту модель глобализации как оптимальную для развития всего мирового сообщества, сам своими руками, своими односторонними санкциями развалил эту универсальную модель, которая быстро фрагментировалась, и сейчас международные финансовые институты, которые создавались под старую модель глобализации, конечно же, должны претерпеть реформу, она давно перезрела, и реформы эти прежде всего должны отражать реальный вес государств в мировой экономике и в мировых финансах. Сейчас, напомню, БРИКС и страны-партнеры представляют производителей более 40% валового внутреннего продукта в мире, тогда как группа 7, которые по-прежнему держат бразды правления в Бреттон-Вудских институтах, едва превышает 30% мирового валового внутреннего продукта. Поэтому реформа назрела, реформу всячески пытаются сдерживать наши западные коллеги, но тенденция необратима. По прогнозам, средние темпы роста государств БРИКС будут составлять где-то 3,7, ближе к 4%, против 2,6 общемировых темпов роста в предстоящий период. Все эти вопросы мы подробно обсуждали, и индийское председательство сделает обобщенное заявление в течение сегодняшнего дня, как мы понимаем. Но основная наша задача, я считаю, была выполнена. Мы обозначили ключевые темы, которые будут вынесены на повестку дня предстоящего в октябре саммита БРИКС в нынешний период проведение такого мероприятия, безусловно, станет одним из главных событий в мировой политике и экономике. Пожалуйста, вопрос.
Пожалуйста, Россия 24.
Добрый день, Сергей Викторович. 20 лет, на 24. 20 лет БРИКС, за это время, конечно, состав стран-участниц, партнеров значительно вырос. Многим западным государствам это не нравится, и, конечно, не секрет, что на некоторые страны оказывается давление. Как вы считаете, влияет ли это на дальнейшее расширение объединения? И есть сейчас это?
Интерес есть. И понимание того, что БРИКС – это прообраз будущего многополярного миропорядка, тоже существует. При этом хочу особо подчеркнуть, что никто не пытается отгораживаться от остальной части мира, от мирового меньшинства. И площадкой, где можно по-деловому, по-честному, на базе поиска баланса интересов обсуждать интересы мирового большинства и мирового меньшинства, является группа 20, где представлены как ведущие страны БРИКС и партнеры БРИКС, и представлены страны группы 7 и их союзники, скажем, азиатские, Япония, Корея. Где-то примерно поровну в двадцатке сторонники и участники БРИКС, и участники и партнеры группы 7. И в целом это весьма перспективная полянка, площадка, если, конечно, наши западные коллеги прекратят свои попытки, которые они какое-то время назад активно предпринимали, попытки украинизировать и эту повестку дня, и повестку дня группы 20. За последние пару лет под председательством в том числе и Южной Африки, и Бразилии, а сейчас вот Индии, мы добиваемся того, что БРИКС будет категорически против каких-либо политических дискуссий в рамках группы 20, которые будут заслонять актуальные задачи реформы мировой экономики, мировой финансовой системы. И поэтому попытаться увести дискуссию в сторону каких-то скандальных тем вокруг проблем, созданных самим же Западом в результате его агрессивной политики, не будет поддержано, эти попытки не будут поддержаны странами БРИКС, которые хотят в двадцатке решать вопросы, ради которых эта группа создавалась. Мировая экономика, мировые финансы, мировая торговля и справедливая реформа Бреттон-Вудских институтов и в целом справедливый подход к системе глобального управления, чтобы страны, имеющие соответствующий вес в мировой экономике, финансах, торговле, логистике, получали адекватное представительство в этих структурах, и в Валютном фонде, и во Всемирном банке, и во Всемирной торговой организации. Не вижу падения интереса к БРИКС в результате давления стран Запада, которые, особенно Соединенные Штаты, публично объявили БРИКС чуть не главным противником прогресса, под которым понимается согласие всех с инициативами Вашингтона, и не вижу снижения интереса к тому, чтобы пополнить ряды нашего объединения, как в плане членства, так и с точки зрения присоединения к группе стран-партнеров. Есть конкретные обращения по получению полноправного членства. Я не думаю, что имеет смысл публично об этом говорить. Введена практика, согласно которой членство в БРИКС будет рассматриваться из тех государств, которые получили статус государства-партнера. И второе понимание, что на данном этапе мы не будем торопиться с расширением количества членов, потому что БРИКС пару лет назад удвоил свои ряды, и нам необходимо, ну, если хотите, притереться к работе вот в новом, существенно увеличенном формате.
Пожалуйста, ведомости.
Ведомости Леонид Стыгал продолжает тему расширения БРИКС. Вновь с 2024 года полноправных членов ОАЭ и Иран сейчас находятся в состоянии вооруженного конфликта де-факто. Обсуждаются ли в рамках БРИКС использование механизмов организации для их примирения и расценивается ли ситуация как угрожающая единству объединения? Спасибо.
Действительно, противоречия проявились между этими двумя странами. И здесь, конечно, нужно иметь в виду необходимость в такого рода дискуссиях, как и при обсуждении любых других конфликтов, концентрироваться на самом главном. Где первопричины нынешнего кризиса? Первопричина нам всем хорошо известна. Ничем не спровоцированная агрессия Соединенных Штатов и Израиля против Исламской Республики Иран. Когда сейчас все взывают к Ирану и кому только еще не взывают с требованием открыть Ормузский пролив, я напоминаю, до 28 февраля этого года, когда началась агрессия, Ормузский пролив работал вообще без каких-либо проблем. Свобода, судоходство обеспечивалось на 100%. Вот, поэтому, когда была затеяна вот эта агрессия против Исламской Республики Иран, она была затеяна совершенно конкретно объявленной целью как бы прекратить 47 лет, в течение которых Иран терроризировал всех своих соседей, весь окружающий мир. Точно так же, как для свержения, похищения президента Венесуэлы была придумана тема его участия в наркотрафике.